The Temple Mount in Jerusalem has never been excavated, but an illegal construction project 20 years ago opened the door to some major discoveries.
Scientists just found something beneath the Temple Mount that was never supposed to be found. A chamber sealed for over 2,000 years, hidden beneath rubble by ancient hands who blocked every entrance, filled every staircase, and buried every trace of what lay inside.
This is so exciting!
Okay, that's old?
Yeah, that's the extension of the shaft.
So this is 19th century, and then down there is the ancient stuff.
Yes.
This is incredible.
When researchers finally breached it, they found a stone basin sitting in a bed of ash. Around it, blackened oil lamps arranged like a final offering, and carved into the stone, in Paleo-Hebrew script that predates the Roman Empire, were words that made the lead archaeologist's voice crack when he read them aloud. "He who dwells here, his spirit never leaves." That phrase matches biblical descriptions of only one place in history, the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctum of Solomon's temple, where the divine presence of God was said to physically dwell. No physical evidence of that space had ever been recovered, until now. And what researchers found next made the discovery even more unsettling. The catastrophe. To understand how researchers ended up in that chamber, you need to know what almost destroyed any chance of finding it. In 1999, the Islamic Waqf began unauthorized construction of an underground mosque beneath the Temple Mount in an area called Solomon's Stables. No archaeologists were consulted. No supervision was permitted. Heavy machinery ripped through soil saturated with 3,000 years of artifacts, tearing through stratified layers that had taken centuries to form. Hundreds of truckloads of that earth were dumped in the Kidron Valley like construction waste. Gone. Just like that. 3 millennia of irreplaceable history, hauled to a landfill without a single photograph, a single measurement, a single record of where any of it had been found. Archaeologists who learned what was happening described the feeling as watching a library burn, except this library could never be rewritten. And get this, the Temple Mount is not just another dig site. This is the single most layered piece of sacred ground on the planet. This is where Solomon built the first temple to house the Ark of the Covenant, where Babylonians burned it to the ground in 586 BCE, where Herod raised a second temple so magnificent that Josephus claimed the gold plating melted and ran between the stones when Rome destroyed it in 70 CE. Muslims revere it as the noble sanctuary. Christians mark it as the site where Jesus confronted the money changers. 3 faiths, 1 hilltop. A political situation so explosive that for over a century no one dared dig beneath it. Then the bulldozers came and everything changed. The rescue. Most archaeologists were devastated, but Gabriel Barkay saw an opportunity. Barkay was already a legend in the field. He had discovered the Shekhinah silver scrolls, tiny rolled strips of metal, inscribed with the oldest known biblical texts ever recorded, predating the Dead Sea Scrolls by 4 centuries. Now, in his 60s, watching sacred ground get carted to a dump, something broke inside him. He and his colleague Zaki Devera launched the Temple Mount Sifting Project, set up in a public park in East Jerusalem, and began recovering what had been lost. By hand. Bucket by bucket, over 500,000 artifacts emerged. Coins from the time of Herod, arrowheads from the Crusades, pottery spanning dozens of civilizations. But here's the catch. The discovery that changed everything was tiny. A hardened lump of clay, cracked with age, that turned out to be a bulla, an ancient seal impression. The inscription read, "Belonging to Gedaliahu, son of Immer." Immer is a priestly family named in the book of Jeremiah, active during the First Temple period. This scrap of fired clay confirmed a real person mentioned in Scripture had lived and worked on this exact site 3,000 years ago. A priest, with a name, with a family, real, more bully surfaced. Names matching biblical records, symbols depicting menorahs and priestly garments. Then, Barkay noticed something that made the hair stand up on the back of his neck. These First Temple artifacts were not scattered randomly. They clustered in specific zones, pointing toward particular sections of the mount that corresponded with ancient descriptions of sacred areas. The Sifting Project had not just recovered artifacts, it had drawn a map, breadcrumbs leading somewhere specific, somewhere that If the ancient texts were accurate, no one had set foot in for over 2,000 years. What they found when they followed those breadcrumbs is next, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. Subscribe and hit the bell. The Hidden Network. Between 2021 and 2024, a new generation of researchers began combining cutting-edge technology with forgotten historical documents. Their focus was the southern edge of the Temple Mount, near the Western Wall tunnels. Leading the effort was Dr. Yuval Baruch, a senior archaeologist with the Israel Antiquities Authority who had spent 2 decades excavating Jerusalem's subterranean layers. Baruch was known for his obsessive attention to detail and for a habit of sketching underground passages by hand before consulting any digital scan. Alongside him was Dr. Sarah Mizrahi, a younger researcher from Hebrew University specializing in First Temple period epigraphy, the study of ancient inscriptions. Mizrahi had made her name deciphering damaged Paleo-Hebrew texts that other scholars had given up on. Colleagues described her as someone who could read stone the way musicians read sheet music. Now, pay attention to this part. British surveyors during the Ottoman and Mandate eras had mapped strange underground voids in this area. Chambers, staircases, hollow spaces that made no geological sense. For generations, those reports gathered dust, dismissed as unreliable. Baruch's team decided to verify them. Physical excavation beneath the Temple Mount was forbidden, so they deployed ground-penetrating radar, the same technology that detected hidden chambers inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. They also used electrical resistivity tomography, which measures how currents flow through subsurface material to distinguish solid rock from empty space. The scans revealed straight edges and geometric shapes beneath the bedrock, where natural geology should have produced only irregular stone, man-made construction, sealed for centuries. When Baruch overlaid the radar data with hand-drawn British maps from the early 1900s, the outlines matched. Same corridors, same blocked staircases, same suspicious voids. A century of technological advancement had just confirmed what Victorian-era explorers suspected. Something was down there, and it had been deliberately hidden. So, here's the problem. As workers cleared debris from an ancient Herodian structure in the Western Wall tunnels, they uncovered a staircase carved into limestone. It dropped straight into darkness. At the bottom sat a forgotten antechamber, the upper. Walls bore Byzantine-era carvings, faded crosses from the 4th or 5th century, early Christian worship. But when Mizrahi examined the floor, she found something far older beneath it. Massive ashlar blocks, finely cut and stacked with a precision rarely seen after the First Temple period. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. These stones had been shaped by masons who built for eternity. Then came the detail that made the entire team freeze. A secondary staircase, half collapsed and packed with rubble, led deeper into the bedrock. It had not collapsed naturally. Someone had filled it deliberately, stone by stone. Every inch, every gap sealed tight. Whoever did this was not trying to repair damage. They were trying to guarantee that no one would ever walk down those stairs again. The question that hung in the air was obvious. What were they hiding? The subterranean machine. As Baruch's team mapped the areas around these sealed chambers, they uncovered something that shifted their entire understanding of the site. A network of underground cisterns, channels, and aqueducts carved directly into the bedrock. The system was vast, interconnected, and engineered with sophistication that should not have existed in its era. Carbon dating of mineral residue around the plaster linings stunned the team. These waterworks were not Roman, not Herodian. They dated to the First Temple period, 8th to 9th century BCE. But that's not even the scary part. It was the design. Narrow feeding tunnels channeled rainwater into reservoirs using methods that prevented stagnation. Overflow ducts redirected excess water to secondary chambers, preventing flooding while maintaining supply. The engineering accounted for pressure, flow rate, and seasonal drought patterns in a region where summers could go months without a single drop of rain. This was not primitive infrastructure. This was precision engineering built to serve something sacred. And whoever designed it understood fluid dynamics at a level that would not be documented in the Western world for another 500 years. When Mizrahi overlaid maps of the cistern network with ancient textual descriptions, Connections emerged that had never been made before. Several cisterns aligned with locations described in the Book of Chronicles as water preparations made by Israelite kings to support temple rituals. One particularly large basin sat beneath the spot that Hebrew texts identified as the location of the altar of sacrifice. That basin was lined with thick layers of ash and faint traces of organic residue, signs of repeated use over many generations. Ritual hand-washing, cleansing of ceremonial tools, libation offerings. Century after century, the same sacred routines, performed in the same sacred spaces, fed by the same engineered water supply. This was not primitive religion conducted in caves and tents. This was a machine of holiness, built with the same precision as the hydraulics that powered it. And get this, the channels led directly to those sealed chambers that no one had entered in over 2,000 years. The water system was not just supporting the temple above, it was connected to something deeper, something that had been deliberately cut off from the surface and sealed behind stone. Here's why this was supposed to be impossible. Before we go behind that sealed threshold, you need to understand something. No physical evidence of the Holy of Holies had ever been found. Not a single artifact, not one inscription, not a fragment of stone that could be definitively linked to the innermost sanctum of Solomon's temple. For decades, a growing number of scholars had argued it was purely a literary construct, a theological metaphor woven into scripture by later editors, but never a physical reality. The reasoning seemed sound. The Babylonians had razed the first temple so thoroughly that virtually nothing survived. The Romans had done the same to the second. Two complete destructions, separated by centuries, had apparently erased every physical trace. Generations of archaeologists had searched the periphery of the mount, probed every accessible tunnel, analyzed every surviving stone. Every single one of them had come up empty. By the early 2000s, the academic consensus was hardening into near certainty. The Holy of Holies, as described in the Bible, was a story, a powerful, resonant, theologically significant story, but a story nonetheless. The idea that physical evidence might still exist beneath the mount was considered at best wishful thinking. That consensus was about to shatter. The stone of the Shekhinah. Baruch moved through the darkness carefully, past ancient water channels slick with mineral deposits, past buried priestly chambers where the faintest traces of handprints still marked the stone, past that blocked staircase someone had sealed with such terrifying finality. The passage narrowed until the walls nearly touched his shoulders. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of wet limestone, and something older, something that had no name, untouched by human lungs for over 2,000 years. The beam of his headlamp was the first light to enter this space since before the Common Era. At the end of the corridor, a sealed stone threshold. Baruch's hands trembled as he helped remove the final stones. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was breathing, rapid, shallow, echoing off walls that had known nothing but silence for millennia. The weight of what they were about to see pressed down on everyone in that tunnel like a physical force. The chamber beyond was small, 10 feet across, walls cut straight into bedrock, smooth and completely undecorated. In ancient Israelite sacred architecture, the holiest spaces were the most austere. No human artistry was considered worthy of adorning a place where the divine was believed to dwell. The simplicity itself was a signature, and there, in the center, sat a stone basin, round, shallow, half buried in ash. Around it, fragments of burned incense, small offerings. Blackened clay oil lamps arranged with unsettling care, as though placed during a final solemn ceremony. The arrangement was not random. It was ritual. Someone had conducted a last act of worship in this space, then sealed it behind them with the full intention that no human being would ever enter again. Unlike spaces that had collapsed naturally over time, this chamber had been deliberately preserved. Whoever sealed it intended for it to remain untouched, forever, not abandoned, preserved. There is a difference. Abandonment is careless. This was the opposite. Every stone in that block staircase had been placed with purpose, as if the people who sealed this chamber believed that what dwelled inside was still present, still sacred, still deserving of protection even after the temple above was gone. The team stood in absolute silence. Baruch later said it felt like time had stopped, like the air itself was holding its breath. Mizrahi had tears streaming down her face before anyone spoke. They all sensed what they were looking at. They just could not bring themselves to say it out loud. The basin bore markings, faded by millennia but legible under the lights. Paleo-Hebrew, the oldest form of the Hebrew script, the same alphabet used during the reigns of David and Solomon. Baruch leaned in, his headlamp casting a sharp circle of white light across the carved letters. When he finally read the words aloud, his voice cracked. "He who dwells here, his spirit never leaves." The words hung in the stale air like something physical. Someone gasped. Mizrahi covered her mouth with both hands. Nobody spoke for what felt like minutes. But here's the catch. Those words were not poetry, not a blessing, not a dedication. They aligned with ancient biblical descriptions of only one place in existence, the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber of the temple, where the Shekhinah, the divine presence of God, was said to physically dwell, so sacred that only the high priest could enter, once per year, on the Day of Atonement. And until that moment, standing in a tunnel 30 feet beneath Jerusalem, no artifact from that space had ever been recovered. No physical proof of its existence had ever surfaced in the history of archaeology. The dating was verified through multiple independent methods. The lamps matched 8th to 7th century BCE examples in both form and chemical composition of residual oil traces. The basin's limestone was consistent with materials quarried during Solomon's reign. Mineral deposits in the ash layers showed chemical signatures matching the specific incense types described in the book of Exodus as reserved exclusively for the tabernacle and the temple. The inscription's phrasing was identical to structures found in First Temple era religious texts, some only recovered from the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 20th century. This chamber delivered what generations of archaeologists had dreamed of and failed to find: physical, datable evidence of the most sacred space beneath the Temple Mount. Evidence that aligned with biblical tradition down to the chemical composition of the incense. Someone, thousands of years ago, carved a message into stone to make sure the truth would survive, no matter how many empires rose and fell above it. The revelation. The discovery sent quiet shockwaves through the academic world. Peer-reviewed journals that typically take months to respond began requesting exclusive access within days, but the announcement has been careful, fragmented, deliberately vague. The authorities who know what was found understand exactly what is at stake. The Temple Mount remains sacred to 3 global religions. Any claim that one tradition's narrative has been definitively proven could ignite crises far beyond Jerusalem's walls. This discovery is a lit match in a room full of gunpowder. Evangelical theologian Dr. Michael Brown called it the most significant archaeological validation of Scripture since the Dead Sea Scrolls, though he cautioned the implications would take decades to unpack. Some Christian communities see the find as prophetic fulfillment, physical proof that the biblical accounts were historical record, not allegory. Some Orthodox Jewish leaders responded with mourning, not celebration. Rabbi David Lau, a former chief rabbi of Israel, reportedly stated that while the discovery confirms what the faithful always knew, disturbing the area of the Shekhinah without proper spiritual preparation remains a transgression of the highest order. For them, this is not triumph, it is trespass. A boundary was crossed that should have remained sacred. Islamic authorities have remained largely silent, though sources indicate intense concern about how the findings might be weaponized to advance territorial claims. Some diplomats have privately warned that even publishing the full findings could destabilize the region. Now, here's what keeps researchers up at night. What stunned many experts was not just the age of the discovery. It was what it revealed about the people who built it. This was not primitive worship conducted by superstitious ancients. This was sophisticated sacred engineering, precise hydraulics, deliberate preservation. A civilization that understood something profound about the relationship between physical space and divine presence, and encoded that understanding into stone, designed to outlast everything built above it, and they succeeded. The radar scans revealed at least 3 additional sealed voids that have never been breached. One sits directly beneath the dome of the rock, 40 feet across, possibly the largest undiscovered space beneath the entire Temple Mount. Scientists are lobbying to deploy muon imaging to map these chambers without breaking ground. But The political and religious barriers may never be overcome. What waits beneath? 3,000 years. That is how long this ground held its silence. Empires rose above it and crumbled to dust. Conquerors built and rebuilt on its surface. Wars were fought over every inch. Crusaders, Ottomans, Romans, Babylonians. They all came and went. And beneath it all, these chambers waited in the darkness, untouched, preserving their secrets with a patience that outlasted civilizations. Now, the silence has been broken. Researchers have breached a chamber that was never meant to be opened. They found a basin, they found ash, they found oil lamps arranged like a final prayer, and they found an inscription carved into stone by hands that knew exactly what they were preserving. Words that say, what Scripture always said would be there. He who dwells here, his spirit never leaves. Sealed chambers still remain. Messages carved in stone remain unread. 3 voids on the radar have never been breached. The question is no longer whether something sacred lies buried beneath the Temple Mount. The question is, how much more is down there, what those ancient hands were protecting, and whether the world is ready to see it. If this changed what you thought you knew, smash that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into lost history. Drop a comment and tell me, should researchers open the remaining sealed chambers, or are there some doors that should stay closed forever?